Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.
You have a civil servant or ex-civil servant standing before you to intoxicate you further. I don't know whether I can do that, but I'll try. When I was posted as coal secretary, I didn't know a hang about the coal sector. So I asked a friend of mine, "Yaar, ye sector kaisa hai?" So instead of answering my question, he asked me a question. He asked me, "Gangs of Wasseypur dekhi hai kya?" So that was my understanding of the coal sector. And when I walked into that office of coal secretary, I got a feeling as if I was walking into a graveyard. Because anything that could have gone wrong with that sector had actually gone wrong. CBI was chasing officers, files were being taken away, everything had crashed. But then I thought, yaar, situation is so bad that anything that will happen to me will be an improvement, and I can walk away with that credit. And that helped because I was blessed with an absolutely amazing team. Absolutely amazing team. So much so that at some point in time, we started saying, give us the Kashmir problem, we just might be able to solve it. And we did sort out the coal sector. From a deficit country, we started thinking in terms of exporting coal to Bangladesh. So much so that after having spent some nights in the office to sort out the scams and everything that happened in the coal sector, after 2 years, I had only about 45 minutes of work. We had managed to digitize everything. There was no discretion left with anybody, and it's holding today as well. Around that time, I met the Prime Minister's office and I told them, there's hardly anything to be done there. Why don't you wind up the ministry and combine it with Mines Ministry? They thought I was joking. But then when I went to them for the second time, around that time, they were looking for perhaps the most illiterate, uneducated civil servant to be made Secretary Education, Government of India. And they found that in Mr. Anil Swarup. So I became Secretary School Education, having no experience whatsoever in education. That's how governance happens. And that's what I'm going to tell you. When you interact with the government, how do you get things moving? After a month or so, someone asked me, "Yaar, this sector kaisa lag raha hai tumhe, education?" I told him, "Yaar, coal mein mining was underground, the mafias were overground. In education, it's the other way around. All the mafias are underground, eating into the essentials of Indian society. It's devastating the way it is." So let me not paint such a gloomy picture of governance. Governance is a great, great job. Some of you would want to become civil servants and do become. Because when I wrote this book, not just a civil servant, the first chapter says that my father wanted me to become an IAS officer. I became one. But after this fabulous experience of 38 years, my wish is that if I were to be born again, it will then be my choice to become an IAS officer all over again. Why? For a simple reason. This is the only service, perhaps, where if you're honest, you can survive. If you're dishonest, you can thrive. If you're efficient, you can survive. Even efficient, you can hide somewhere yet get your promotions. And I don't know whether you know about the bureaucratic hierarchy. I jokingly say that if you're efficient, you might become Secretary Government of India. You are inefficient, you might become Cabinet Secretary Government of India. That's the top bureaucratic post in the country. So that's what IAS is all about. And those of you that are thinking in terms of becoming an IAS officer, there's no better job anywhere else in the world as good as the IAS. So that's it. But as an outsider, when you look at the government, you must try and appreciate if things don't move. Why don't they move? Because in order to find a solution to any problem, you have to understand the why of a problem. The moment you understand the why of a problem, you'll be able to find a solution of that problem. Because it is easy to have an idea. If I talk to all of you and ask you about ideas, there'll be hundreds of ideas coming in. But for an idea to fructify and sustain in a democracy like ours, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, and judicially tenable. Handful. It's not easy. You may have a great idea, but my boss does not agree with it. My political boss. How do you get it moving? The politician may agree, but it is not good for the public as a whole. It won't thrive. You don't have the money, but you may have the great idea. Jeb mein nahi patta chal diya Kolkata. What do you do? You have to have money in your hand for ideas to work. You have to have an administrative structure for an idea to work. It doesn't work like that. So it's tough. It's tough, but it is eminently doable. Eminently doable. And there are a large number of civil servants. I'm glad the previous speaker did speak about civil servants who are performing. There are many of them who are performing. But unfortunately, the performance doesn't get to be known. It doesn't get to be known because you don't appear before public. Now, of course, they are. But by and large, you don't get to know. What happens is that remains hidden. It's only the negative news, because unfortunately, news by definition is exception. No? But we tend to believe that's the rule. So when we read in the newspaper, we think that's the situation in the area, that's what an individual is all about, whereas actually it may be different. So that's how it is. So when you interact with the government, you must know who to interact with and how to interact with and how to move. I remember I was doing this scheme called Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, the health insurance scheme. And it seemed to have got recognition world over, but within the country it took some time. You know, in India, it is only when yoga becomes yoga, it gets to be recognized in the country of origin. So you have to have a Western stamp for it to be recognized in the country. So I was doing this and I was traveling all over the world. So I got a call that the cabinet secretary, the top bureaucrat, wanted to talk to me. So when I landed in India, I gave him a ring and asked him, he said, Anil, kal subah come over for a cup of tea. Now this chai pe charcha, as you hear, is nothing new. Pehle we used to call it over a cup of tea. So he called me for a cup of tea. I went there in the morning. He said, you have been drafted for a special assignment. So my heart sank, because 2 years before that, I had been drafted to become the head of the anti-Naxal wing in the country. So I thought, ab to Jammu and Kashmir bhejenge mujhe. But fortunately, he said, nahi, Anil, what is happening? And this is 2013, when all scams were breaking in, and government was unable to give clearances. Faster clearance was not happening because civil servants were not taking decisions on the file. So I was asked to head a project monitoring group to fast-track projects in the country. Now, I am telling you this is, even in those set of circumstances, you could actually get things moving, because technology allows you to do that. So what we did was, we set up a web portal wherein any industry, now I was tasked to fast-track projects above 1,000 crore. So any industry that had an investment of more than 1,000 crore, they could give their problem on the portal which we set up. The problem could flow directly to the designated joint secretary in the respective department. He was mandated to write his comment, and then I used to have tripartite discussions, during the course of which I used to ask them to expedite decisions. Now, to cut a long story short, within 15 months, during UPA 2, we managed to clear projects worth 5 lakh crores. So someone asked me, how did you manage to do that? I said, it's very simple. No matter how inefficient I am, to the public, I'd like to appear to be efficient. And hence, if the world knows that this guy or this Babu is sitting on this file for so many days and so many hours, he will start moving, because he would not like to be known as a guy. What happens normally is, generally speaking, comments are passed. But if you specifically find out that this guy is sitting on the file, he'll move it. So much so that one cabinet minister lost her job because of these delays. What had happened was, this lady minister, she was sitting on files worth 53,000 crores. And I used to write to the cabinet secretary stating that this should be brought to the notice of the prime minister. Unfortunately, he didn't. But one day, I happened to meet Mr. Oscar Fernandez, who was earlier a minister. I had worked with him and I had known him very well. I asked him, sir, wo madam jo hai, she's taking money in the name of madam, and you are close to the family, why don't you tell the family? So he says, Anil ji, suna to maine bhi hai. तो मैंने कहा, बताइए उनको, अगर उनके पास पैसा पहुंच रहा है तब तो ठीक है, वो ले रही हैं उनके नाम से, उनके पास नहीं पहुंच रहा तो गड़बड़ बात है ना. So I don't know what happened. 7 days down the line, she was shown the door. And you know, that name was added to a tax, and she was shown the door. The point that I'm trying to make here is, today you have technology to actually move things fast. So whether it's a startup or an entrepreneur, I think what he requires more than land or capital or human resource is, when they interact with the government, it becomes easy for them to interact. They don't have to run from pillar to post. An excellent experiment is being done in Haryana. In fact, I have started something called a Nexus of Good. And in the launch of Nexus of Food, this gentleman made a presentation where what he has done is, he's identified all the processes under which a common man has to interface with the government. It could be an entrepreneur, it could be a common man. So a death certificate, a birth certificate, a transfer, everything. He is trying to eliminate this physical interface through use of technology. So if you want something, a certificate, you go to that kiosk, apply it there, and you can actually track that paper where that paper is sitting. It has actually is transforming the way things are. So my suggestion to you all is, get to know more about how transparency and technology is actually transforming governance in some of these states. It's happening in Haryana. I'm told it's happening in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. It's happening elsewhere. As Secretary of Education, I was using technology to see what? In northern states of India, teachers don't go to the schools, 25–30%. They don't. They actually employ a para-teacher and pay him 1/4 of his salary and ask him to teach on their behalf. Now, people here and perhaps south of India would not understand what I am talking. Even internationally, people don't understand. Because I remember when I took over as school education secretary, the word went around that here is an ignorant, illiterate man becoming education secretary. And I had a lot of advisors coming to me to advise on how education should be handled. In UP, we call them Rai Sahabs. They give you the Rai ka lalla and then they walk away. And you don't know what to do with that Rai, because those guys who give you the Rai haven't done anything on the ground. They're international advisors, highly paid, and give you the advice. And they used to tell me, sir, you must go to England, Finland, Holland, Scotland, Netherlands, all the lands of the world. But they won't talk about motherland. So then I decided, okay, I'll visit motherland and see what's happening here. And what I saw was absolutely amazing. And when I say I traveled to 24 states in 3 months, they were not merely the headquarters. I traveled to districts like Bastar and Sukma, which at some point in time were part of the state. I traveled from Pune to Goa, dropping down on the way. Traveled from Srinagar to Leh, not taking the national highway, go deep inside, to understand what was happening in India. And what I saw was absolutely amazing. Such wonderful work being done. We picked up 110 models from there, and then called these people over to Delhi and asked them to replicate. I'm so glad that I was informed that the startups that are doing well have set up an exhibition here. There's so much to learn from each other. And one example I must give you, I walked into a government primary school in a place called Pastepada. This is 120 kilometers north of Thane in deep tribal area. I was told this school does not have electricity. When I walked into a classroom, there were about 40–50 children in the entire school, primary school. Every child had a tablet. So I turned around to the teacher and asked this chap, Sandeep Gund. I asked him, yaar, ye bijli kahan se aati hai? So he took me around the school and showed me foldable solar panels through which he was charging the batteries, and through batteries he was charging the tablets. But I asked him, where did you get these tablets from? He said, sir, when I came to this school, I had a second-hand laptop. And on this second-hand laptop, I used to play these educational videos. So these children used to congregate around it, and they used to enjoy it. So after around 2 months, about 15–20 parents came to the school, and they asked this teacher a very funny question. They asked him, पहले तो बच्चे स्कूल नहीं जाते थे, भागते स्कूल के लिए, क्या किया आपने? So he said कि मैंने अपने लैपटॉप पे दिखाते हैं. So when he found these parents interested, he requested them for 500 rupees each. They contributed, he bought 2 more tablets and attached them to the laptop. This, indulgence, and someone was talking about the kick, someone was talking about the passion. This chap had the passion. So what he did was, because of his passion, it went around. So one CSR funding agency and an NGO visited the school. And they saw this passionate teacher. So this CSR funding agencies provided tablets to them. Around which time I visited the school. And when I saw this passion, I took a photograph with the teacher and tweeted it. Suddenly he became a local hero. He became a pilgrimage for other schools. So they started visiting the school and started copying this. In between, I happened to meet the President of India in a different context. And I narrated this story to him, Sandeep Gund's story. And then I asked him, would you like to meet the teacher? He said, yes. I called him over to Delhi. He met the president, took a photograph with him. He suddenly becomes a national hero. But this is not the end of the story. The Pastepada model has been replicated within 2 years in 50,000 schools of Maharashtra. It's absolutely amazing. And what is even more amazing is that every penny of 354 crores that was required was raised through crowdfunding. Nothing from the government. It's a classic example of public-private partnership. The story doesn't end here. I was traveling to Gujarat in a school. A teacher comes running up to me and says, "Sir, मेरे school में चलिए." हमने कहा, "क्यों?" "Sir, मैंने संदीप गुण से ज़्यादा अच्छा काम किया है." Here is a guy in Gujarat telling me that. Task done. So I would suggest that each one of you will have to determine what your own kick is. No one else can decide. It comes from within. I remember when I was doing this RSBY, I used to travel. So President Obama had just taken over as president of the US. and their advisors rang me up. They asked me to make a presentation before their advisors on the health insurance. So I tried to wriggle out. I said, India is a different country, our concept is totally different, but they insisted. So in one of the visits to Washington, I went over to Brookings Institute, which houses these advisors, and I made a presentation. And during that presentation, you had representatives of Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation sitting there. And after the presentation, I was having a cup of tea outside, and this guy from Gates Foundation walks up to me and asks me, Mr. Swaroop, you are a civil servant, but you seem to be very passionate about what you're doing. What else are you getting beyond the salary that the government gives you? I didn't have an immediate answer. I asked him a counter question. I asked him, Gates Foundation gives millions of dollars to poor country. What do you get out of it? He said, well, that's a job. But more than that, we derive a lot of satisfaction out of helping poor people. I said, you answered your question. You have answered your own question. I told him, the scheme that I'm running is for the poorest of the poor in India. A large number of those people would have been dead but for this scheme. Good wishes of those people who survive and their families come back to me, that's good enough a kick for me to continue to do what I'm doing. And then I narrated an incident to him. In this scheme, I used to visit these small and medium hospitals that were empaneled. I remember I was visiting one of the hospitals and I was talking to a beneficiary patient. Suddenly I heard a very feeble voice from behind. I turned around and I saw a very old lady calling me, Beta idhar aao. I went to her, bent down. She couldn't sit. I bent down and asked her, Mata ji, aap theek to hain? बेटा मैं बहुत तकलीफ में हूँ, लेकिन इन अस्पताल वालों ने मेरा बड़ा ख्याल रखा है. I said, फिर तो आप ठीक हो जाएंगी, अपने घर जाएंगी. नहीं बेटा, मैं तो भीख मांगती थी, मेरा तो कोई घर भी नहीं है, एक झोपड़ी में मैं रहती थी. और ना भाई है, ना बेटा है, मैं बीमार पड़ गई, तुम्हारा ये कार्ड था, इट वॉज स्मार्ट कार्ड बेस्ड स्कीम, कार्ड था, पड़ोसी ने कार्ड देखा, मुझे यहाँ ले आया अस्पताल में, मेरी सेवा कर रहे हैं. हमने कहा, माता जी फिर जैसा भी होगा आप ठीक हो गए. नहीं बेटा, अब तो मेरी उम्र इतनी हो गई, अब मैं ऊपर वाले के पास जाऊंगी. I was a bit surprised. She insisted. And finally she made a very remarkable statement. She said, ऊपर वाले जाके एक बात जरूर कहूंगी, तुम्हारी स्कीम बहुत अच्छी है.